folks. Welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic. We're back after our brief hiatus. Keen to get going again. We've been dying to get back. Like any sort of modernization projects, we've all been kind of busy this past couple of months, and especially with ServerlessDays Belfast, which was a brilliant event, and we will talk about that in another episode. But good fun. Starting to come up for air. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, it's been busy. I think there's lots going on. Modernization and a lot of the things we've captured in the book are becoming more and more relevant to organizations as they try to go faster. And I think with the added accelerant of AI now sprinkled on everything, it's becoming more and more important to focus on the foundations and the fundamentals.
Yeah, I'd love to say we're living the dream, but let's maybe say we're living the book. Well, it's all good fun. And Mike will be back next time, but he's currently in his happy place. He's on a plane. He's probably sitting going through his pre-flight checks, waiting to be asked to land the plane. Which, you know, that he's probably sitting around to go. But no, he's on a short trip at the moment, but he'll be back next time. And yeah, with all the AI stuff has gone absolutely mental.
Yeah.
This past couple of months, it's everywhere, and we've been doing a bunch of stuff ourselves. Like, so maybe that's something we can talk about another time. There's lots to talk about there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a series of talks on that would be very useful, even just to articulate what we've been thinking about and what we've been sort of trying to drive in our own organizations. So it's definitely on trend, I guess.
Super exciting, and I will say to everybody, the answer is not replace all your people with AI. That is definitely not.
No, please don't do that.
Recipe for success. So yeah, so we want to continue the series about the book. So I think last time we had done the map of the market and the cloud guru. So I think next is chapter into phase 2 of the flywheel, which is challenge and landscape, and chapter 9, which is environment for success. This is a funny one. I mean, well, this couldn't be more important actually in the current climate. It really couldn't.
Yeah.
And even looking back over the chapter, I think this is like, I think we said it. This is just as bang on the money.
Yeah.
That you're creating the right environment for success.
Yeah, it's more relevant now than it has ever been. And I think some of the key tenets we called out at the for this phase around psychological safety, team first environments always win. The system is the asset, a socio-technical systems view, and then map the org for enablement, enable empowered engineers. Those are very strong tenets for now and into the future, and they still hold up from when we wrote this.
And you can even see not the leap far ahead, like, but organizations that have not done that enablement properly, I think are really, as AI just takes over now, like they're just going 10 different directions.
Yeah.
If
you don't have a good environment for success, you're just building on a house of sand.
Yeah, completely. Well said. So I mean, and one of the interesting things about this, I think, is the idea of the team. I mean, I think we've spent lots of time, many years in software teams. There's lots of different personas. So we wanted to sort of, like, without calling anybody out, but kind of gently talk about some of the anti-patterns. The one that always resonated with me was the hero anti-pattern. Like, oh, Jimmy's brilliant. He's amazing. He'd do anything. He'd work all weekend. He'd stay up all night. Like, he calls everything out. And you go, that's not good for anything. Not good for Jimmy. Not good for the company. Not good for the team. It's that's one of the original sort of like anti-patterns of a good team. The fact that and we used to always say it's the hit by a bus syndrome.
Yeah.
And now people say it a bit nicer now, that they win the lottery syndrome. You're dependent on one person, and then everyone else looks to that one person for all the answers. It doesn't really help with the development of the team.
Yeah, and you never want to call people out for going the extra mile and putting in an extra effort, but it's a symptom of the team not being functioning, that everything goes through that one person, right?
Yeah,
you need to think about distributing sort of that knowledge, upskilling everybody else, and sharing the load, and trying to make sure that you have a healthy team, not just one rock star.
Yeah, and rock star is the phrase that we had always heard over the years, and I actually think this is quite an innocent mistake, because sometimes leaders will talk about Mark's a rock star, but it's one thing praising someone, but it's another thing maybe helping them sort of as they say, share the load, like, and helping them develop.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can be stuck if you're a rock star. You can't move to new things.
And I think some of this is indicative of the environment they're operating in as well. So you got to make sure that your incentives are properly aligned with people being team players, right? So you're not penalizing people for doing teamwork and things that are beneficial to the team, not just to them individually.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing I thought that was really interesting about this chapter was the idea of challenge.
Yep.
I remember a few of my US colleagues have said in the past that I used to always use the phrase challenge as being in an environment where you can challenge ideas and challenge the thinking, which I think is healthy. It's the same with the Wardley map.
Yep.
If you're working something out, you challenge the map, not the person. A lot of my US colleagues in the past have said, I'm not very comfortable with you talking about challenge. And used to say, I'm not challenging you. I'm challenging this direction, which should be healthy. Because at the end of the conversation, it'll be a good outcome regardless. It's not about me versus you.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this with Wardley maps, but creating artifacts that you can coalesce around or challenge is a much healthier process than challenging somebody who's standing up giving a narrative or telling a story, right? So sometimes it's good to have a lot of the thinking articulated, whether that's in ADRs, whether that's in tech designs, whether that's in confidence docs, whatever. It's or lucid or Miro diagrams or whatever. It's good to create an artifact that you can challenge, and it takes a lot of the personal sort of challenge out of it, right? It takes some of the heat out of that. So it's easier to challenge artifacts than it is to challenge people telling a story or creating a narrative.
And then I think as well, there's a big thing about the leadership culture with the environment. And maybe say it's per management as well. When teams become like tribes or packs, like this is my team and that's your team, and like we're going to win out, we're going to build this thing. It's not going to be you. There's a lot of bad behavior that happens around that. If and maybe go back to the whole clarity of purpose stuff. If there is per clarity of purpose, then that type of behavior will happen because people are kind of looking for things to do or looking for land grabs, etc. So there is a cultural shift, I think, to think about like what's the value what's the value we're working towards, as opposed to how can I make my manager look good.
Yeah, and it's that aligned autonomy, that clarity of purpose, knowing who your users are, what their needs are, and making sure that what you're doing is actually beneficial to them. It sounds simple, harder to do in reality, but it is incredibly important that you work on things that actually are impactful and matter, right? You're not just doing busy work.
And I think this is such, there's a huge amount of content written about this type of leadership, and you'd think like, funny enough, I mentioned like stuff like some organizations like the military do this really well, and it's not a thing like new companies do it well, old companies don't do it well. It really is a mix. Yep. Some brand new companies are absolutely brilliant because they're super clear. There's the founders still there. Some very old companies are brilliant at this because it's been locked in what they do, So it's really I think you can lose it quite easily with different leaders. So it really is a fascinating area.
I do think we've covered this in earlier chapters, but I do think if you find that it's a bit ambiguous and you're not quite sure what your clarity of purpose is, doing a quick North Star exercise is usually a good way to discover what your purpose should be, right, and remove some of that ambiguity.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny, like, and that probably brings us to like some of the behaviors.
Oh, yeah.
I know there's a wee bit in the book called Behaviors Supporting Challenge, and we printed Simon Wardley's doctrine. Simon, who was actually spoke at Serverlessdays Belfast a few weeks ago, which was brilliant. Super pleased to get him over. It was great crack, and as usual, he blew the entire crowd away. But we diverge. So the doctrine is brilliant, and it's he would kind of describe this as universally useful patterns that a user can apply regardless of context. And it's such a well thought out list. And he's kind of got it broken into like kind of 4 phases with different headings around communication, development, operation, learning, leading, and structure. And it's always quite natural to go, oh, great, well, let's go down to the end and let's do the more advanced one. But Going on the first one is kind of like know your users and like stop self-harm. So
Yep.
it starts off really basic, is like just there are like some really serious fundamentals before you get into some of the more advanced stuff.
Yeah, and I think Simon says he's talking to organizations about, hey, we want to do some of these more advanced capabilities and do some of these advanced phases. He's like, well, have you done the stop self harm bit yet? Do you know who your users are? Do you know what they need? Do you know your landscape? Do you have reasonable situational awareness? Start at the basics first, and then work up the
Yeah,
phases.
that's funny. Like I just have one of the very first ones is challenge assumptions. And that's a better way to look at challenge. I think not a better way. It's a different way to think about challenge. It's because often somebody will say, "Oh, we should do." It's just language. We should do this,
Yeah,
and maybe they could have said, "Maybe we could do this,"
yeah,
and that opens up a conversation. But as a senior person, if you say we should do this, some often people take that as gospel. That's
yeah,
the direction, and it's often very hard for a leader to actually say, "Listen, I don't really know what we should do. I'm trying to figure it out."
yeah.
You
And
know, so,
it can depend on the age of the organization as well, but a lot of these assumptions are almost just like baked into the code base or baked into some of the legacy documentation. So, or it's just tribal knowledge and people who've been there the longest has had. So, it's always good to challenge those assumptions and sort of start to uncover. Well, does that assumption still hold true? The world has changed significantly in those past few years. Is this still a true assumption, right? So, and I
yeah.
think some of the, and we'll probably cover this in the further podcast, but some of the AI capabilities and AI tooling can help uncover and discover if those assumptions still hold true in a fairly quick way.
Well, it is actually very interesting asking some of the models like the same question because it'll just spit out.
Yep.
You'd be like, "Oh dear, didn't think about that," which is good. Yeah, I think there are. What I think is really interesting is there are those universal behaviors that you can look at,
Yep.
and it's great to kind of think of that. I think they're on kind of page 111. Interesting, and
Yep.
that probably brings us to psychological safety. Like for me, I think when I talk about phase two of the flywheel about the environment for success, I always kind of simplify it down to psychological safety because I think that's probably the best kind of summary.
Yep.
Um, I think we did, yeah, we did reference Amy Edmondson about her The Fearless Organization book, which is brilliant. It's a really good read. Around psychological safety, again, there's literally books written on it, like, and it's a very interesting idea. I remember mentioning this to people in the past, and some people kind of laugh at it, thinking it was kind of funny, but it's not funny at all.
No.
It's very deep, and it's kind of like how do you feel how do you feel that you can show up and work, and you can say what you think, and you're in an environment where you don't feel kind of threatened. Do you feel that you can actually speak your mind and be honest? It's safe. They have an idea and kind of and that should be now there's obviously sometimes there's meetings like maybe a customer meeting or like a sales meeting or something where you do have to, there's a specific
Yep.
play going on or between two companies. That's fair enough. But if you're within your team, you pretty much should be in a space where you can kind of kick around ideas and ask any questions.
Yeah. It's hard to continuously improve if people won't speak up for fear of getting shouted at or punished for raising issues, right? So it's critical that you have a psychologically safe environment where challenge is accepted, ideas are accepted. You're not going to shoot the messenger, right? And it's hard to do, right? And you got to continuously iterate on this, and you got to continuously keep an eye on this and make sure that you are creating as safe as an environment as possible. And it's hard to craft and hard to set up properly, and it's easy to lose. So you just got to be very mindful, especially as leaders, how you approach this.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk through a fairly safe example. We haven't talked about this, like, but often, I'm sure we've both seen often when you're working with a bunch of developers, you'll decide that let's standardize on language. Not for any reason. It's like you have to like all your kind of your pipelines, your deployments, your testing. A lot of utilities you'll base around language, and it's kind of better to maybe standardize one. So at the minute, a lot of us would standardize in JavaScript, for example, because for some reason that makes a difference. We can just that works for a lot of the technology. or whatever. So you might say, that's fair enough. And then a developer will say, well, I'd like to use .NET. And you say, why? Because I prefer it.
Yeah.
And you have to politely say, well, yeah, it's probably better for some things, but we need to standardize in one.
Yeah.
And you very politely say, no, we need to make a standard in one, because just to make everything more effective, we can't have 15 different languages. But then there's a point where something like Rust comes along, and someone says, well, actually, Rust might be really good for this use case. You think, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we should look at that, So you want to have the psychological safety to say we should actually look at a different language, versus, the fear of saying, can I use .NET, and being shot down and saying we're not allowed to do anything else. So I would say that is a good example of psychological safety, where engineers should really talk about other languages, but you can explain why the organizations made the decisions that they made. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think bringing some artifacts into this as well, like having a well-crafted ADR, architectural decision record, on the language choice gives you something the challenge. You're not challenging Dave, you're challenging, hey, by the way, we have an ADR that says JavaScript's our go-forward language. Rust has a new capability that might fit this use case. Can I challenge the ADR? That's a easier, more safe conversation than I'm going to challenge Dave.
Yeah, completely. And then the answer is always yes, go for it. Add some stuff to the ADR, and if you've spotted something, it probably is better, but let's explain that so it doesn't turn into a free-for-all, But that's clearly a very simplistic example, but it might be nice not the
Yes.
It's there's lots of other more kind of sinister examples we'll not get into. And then one thing I think we'll move on to the Westrum stuff.
Yeah.
Like I think this was first in was it in the Accelerate book?
Yeah.
By Nicole Forsgren, and a guy called Dr. Ron Westrum. I think he's a psychologist. I think I actually met him a couple of years ago at a conference. He's a lovely guy. He did this study on Westrum's organizational culture, and he studied. He done a lot of stuff around kind of military and hospitals and kind of public and military sectors. So he's not really a computer guy. He talked about how the organization, how information flows around the organization. And because of purely how the information flows, he came up with these three ways of organization. The pathological, which is power orientated, which there's low cooperation. Information doesn't kind of flow very well. This is what we know. We're not telling anyone. Bureaucratic, which is role orientated, which is, yes, we can tell you, but you got to go through that process, and everything is by process is very slow. And then generative, which is performance orientated, which is sharing information to build kind of context and capability. Right? I mean, when he put this out, the word generative was quite like, what does that mean? Now generative AI is everywhere, so I thought that was kind of funny. But it's a really interesting model, and I always found it's really interesting sitting with the leader, going through this table, and seeing where they think they are in the organization. And I always like the tenant create in the open. If you're writing a doc, just open it up. You know what I mean? Don't keep it the only stuff we would keep kind of locked down is maybe something quite personal if it's talking about an individual or something, but by default, keep everything open.
Yeah, and it's learning or generative organization, I think we put it down as, right? And it's, if you are in a learning organization, you can adapt more easily to the changing landscapes. So if you are a psychologically safe and a very learning, performance oriented organizational culture, you are better able to adapt to the wave of AI, for example, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's willing to try and share and cooperate and challenge each other, right? With this new emerging capabilities, right? So it'll be much harder for a pathological or a bureaucratic organization to adapt to this new wave of modernization that we see in front of us.
Well, actually, AI is a brilliant example, and you could just apply that. Like in the pathological, it would be like, well, we figured out a way to generate API specs in our team, but we're not telling anyone because we can go faster.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be good, right? Bureaucratic, there's only one team that are allowed to use AI to generate API specs because they're the API team. No one else can do it. Everyone else is doing it themselves. Everyone will just be pissed off. And then performance oriented, we're all going to learn about this. We're going to put something on Slack. We're going to put out a video. Everyone will do a little bit and you give back in. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of that generative behavior. Well, hopefully we are. Well, I know we are, and I mean, our companies but that's what you kind of want. There's almost like it's a massive learning opportunity to figure out this new space. So let's all just share what you know and see so it's very interesting model. That's the Westrum organization culture. He's got some great stuff. It's definitely worth looking him up, Dr. Ron Westrum. Cool. Well, then the last bit of the book, the chat chapter, is mapping psychological safety, which we'll not go through in detail, but it's just a nice wee illustration of what we just talked about.
Yeah, the trust, clarity of purpose, environment to execute, and opinions are heard. That's not bad. That's pretty. The map still stands up. It's good to see.
Cool. It's funny doing these maps, because I mean, we did that map probably 5 years ago. That don't make sense.
Yep.
Very good. It is interesting. Some of these things they don't really age that much, No. It's not like there's a lot of the tech at the time baked into that. It's interesting. Well, the only thing is the Pioneer Settler Town Planner language has changed, but still the principles are the same. Cool. Well, that's the crack. I mean, I think the main point over that is psychological safety in that chapter. So it's definitely a good read and extremely relevant today with all the AI stuff going on.
Absolutely. And challenge is healthy, right? Invite challenge. That's exactly what you want.
Capture your thinking in some kind of document or graph or map or something, put it out there and ask people to comment on it. Yep. Feedback is a gift, as they say.
Yep.
Cool. Well, that's us. Glad to be back now. It's good to be back doing these again, and good fun. We'll get O'Reilly back in the case when he's back again. So give us a follow on the Serverless Age and have a look at the serverlessage.com and give us a like, give us any feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.